Thank you for following this storyline. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content so you won't miss updates on other exciting comic storylines. Zhang Yi, once considered weak, now stood before the residents of apartment number 18. Their faces showed sincerity but also a deep determination to protect Lin Jian, even at the cost of their own lives. The tense atmosphere made Zhang Yi try to calm the situation. He began to dig into the reason behind their fear until they finally admitted that the baby he had entrusted to them, Si Lime, had not survived. That explanation opened Zhang Yi's awareness. Their fear actually stemmed from the baby he had once abandoned. The residents mistakenly believed that the child was of great importance to him, so her death was considered a grave mistake. Zhang Yi understood that surviving in these conditions was already difficult, let alone for a baby. He assured them that the tragedy was not their fault and stated that he only wanted to understand how they had managed to survive. Lin Jian, as their leader, invited Zhang Yi inside, promising to show him something interesting. Along the way, Lin Jian explained that they had repeatedly tried to plant the seeds Zhang Yi had given them, but all their attempts had failed. Everything changed when a group from the snow sect arrived, offering help, but only on the condition that they worshipped the snow god. After enduring great hardship, Lin Jian finally accepted their offer, gaining a new ability that changed his life. His body was now capable of growing plants, earning him the title of the Plant Man. The produce he generated was highly nutritious and grew rapidly in any environment. However, Zhang Yi felt something was off about this ability. A human body should not be able to produce food in such large quantities. Without hesitation, Zhang Yi stepped into a room Lin Jian had mentioned, only to be horrified by the sight before him, dead bodies, serving as fertile soil for growing crops. Lin Jian explained that they used corpses as fertilizer to grow the seeds. Around them, there were many unused bodies that served as a resource for survival. Zhang Yi, intrigued, asked how many rooms had already been used for this purpose. It turned out that 3 rooms had been utilized so far, and for now, they did not need more. Even though this concept of self-sustainability sounded reasonable, Zhang Yi warned that if this method continued, Lin Jian's body would eventually be unable to endure it, leading to his death. Lin Jian accepted this reality. Using his powers was painful, but he was willing to bear the suffering to ensure the survival of his wife and child. Although Zhang Yi found such self-sacrifice irrational, he couldn't help but admire Lin Jian's courage. He then asked to see Lin Jian's ability more clearly, wanting to determine whether his power was natural, like Zhang Yi's, or artificially induced like the abilities of those at the military base. Additionally, Zhang Yi wanted to know if Lin Jian's power could be used offensively, or if it was limited to plant growth. Prepared to demonstrate his ability, Lin Jian exerted himself, causing one of the seeds embedded in his arm to rapidly sprout and grow into a fully developed plant. Witnessing this, Zhang Yi felt disgusted and immediately warned that it was enough. The process was draining Lin Jian's already weakened body. Walking toward the door, Zhang Yi grabbed the newly grown plant, contemplating what he had just seen. He acknowledged that such an ability was extremely useful for food production in times like these. However, if he ever deemed it a threat, Zhang Yi wouldn't hesitate to eliminate Lin Jian and all the residents of the apartment. Having gathered all the information he needed, Zhang Yi left Lin Jian and the others without a word, leaving them to continue their grim existence. Lin Jian, the leader of apartment number 18, felt relieved as Zhang Yi, the feared and deadly figure, finally left. For Lin Jian, his experiment had seemingly succeeded, but he knew that their lives still remained under Zhang Yi's control. Zhang Yi returned to his residence. There wasn't much he could do except wait for developments regarding the missile threat before taking further action. The attack plan would only proceed if Lien successfully planted the tracking chip into the military base's central computer. At the military base, newly enslaved residents were being assigned to their respective workstations. Many of the villagers were furious. One grieving father wept, expressing his resentment. He claimed that these newcomers had stolen their food, taken their homes, and killed his father and daughter. He believed they were 100 times worse than Zhang Yi. But complaints about injustice only led to execution. Anyone who did not wish to share the same fate was forced into obedience. The soldiers had once helped and sacrificed for their village, but now, they had to repay everything through forced labor in the base. From a distance, Lien watched everything with mixed emotions. He knew that the bodies of the fallen residents would soon be used as raw materials, but he chose to focus his thoughts on the mission at hand. He headed to the second floor, a place divided into 5 main sections, including food and nutrition. Security on this floor was not as strict as on the EMP floor, which was the main focus of Chen Yuan, the base leader. As he approached the control room, Lien ensured the surrounding area was safe. However, he was startled when someone touched his shoulder from behind. He instinctively prepared to attack, but his movement stopped when a familiar voice urged him not to act. He recognized the voice. It was Tian, one of his students. Tian looked shocked to see Lien return after having previously escaped. He asked why his teacher had come back. Lien explained that he had returned to save Tian and the other students. Tian then recounted his experiences. He revealed that the students had been taken to undergo cruel experiments, and he was the only one who had survived. The methods used were so brutal that even remembering them made him cry. Those who managed to survive were given the opportunity to serve the base and live a better life, but at a heavy price. Their life force was drained every time they used their powers. Lien listened intently, then asked what Tian planned to do. Tian stated that he not only wanted to escape but also sought revenge on those who had tortured them and destroyed their lives. Lien comforted his student, assuring him that there was still hope, to save the remaining survivors and take revenge at the same time. After discussing and formulating a strategy, Tian spoke with other soldiers, issuing orders to guard the control room. Meanwhile, Lien began preparing to install the tracking chip in the military base's computer. On the other hand, Zhang Yi was at his residence. That day marked the deadline given by Qinyuan for Zhang Yi to decide whether he would join him. When the call came, Zhang Yi gave a firm response. He would not join and was not afraid of any threats. This declaration enraged Qinyuan, who then threatened to destroy Banger, Zhang Yi, and his family. However, Zhang Yi remained unfazed, simply telling Chen to wait for the consequences of his actions before ending the call. Even though the missile threat from Qinyuan seemed real, Zhang Yi knew that joining the military base was not an option for him. His top priority now was finding a new place to protect the people he cared about. His thoughts were interrupted when a message from Lien arrived. In it, Lien reported that he had successfully completed his part of the deal by installing the tracking chip in the military base's computer. Upon hearing this, Zhang Yi immediately went to find Shinsen and informed her of Lien's success. The news excited Shinsen, the girl familiar with wheeled devices. She quickly grabbed her computer and began working. Even though she only had a basic computer, she managed to access all the data from the enemy military base. A look of triumph spread across her face as she confidently declared that nothing could stop her now. Zhang Yi moved closer to see what data had been retrieved. At that moment, Shinsen was completely focused on her screen. Zhang Yi directed his attention to their greatest concern, the missile threat. He asked if they could access any information regarding the weapon. Shinsen began retrieving conversations between military base leaders from various cities. From the data, they discovered that a missile launch was indeed being planned against a common enemy. This revelation shocked them both. The missile threat Qinyuan had mentioned was real. Realizing this, Zhang Yi felt a deep sense of loss. The destruction of Banger would be a devastating blow. However, amidst the serious atmosphere, Shinsen presented a bold plan. With a teasing tone, she asked Zhang Yi if he was ready to have a little fun while executing her idea. Shinsen's plan was to alter the missile's target coordinates, so that instead of hitting Banger, the missile would strike Qinyuan's own base. Her strategy impressed Zhang Yi, though he questioned whether the change would be detected. With confidence, Shinsen explained the mechanism behind the coordinate manipulation, ensuring that Qinyuan's allies would not realize the change. Once the launch command was given, she would sever communications between the bases, preventing interference during the missile's flight. Zhang Yi then requested Karen to check the structural layout of the enemy's base. He wanted to determine whether its destruction was truly feasible. Karen explained that Zishan base had an extremely strong structure, extending 100 meters underground. Even a missile alone would not be enough to completely destroy it. Despite this, Zhang Yi was not entirely satisfied. He still ordered Shinsen to proceed with the plan to redirect the missile toward Qinyuan's base. Additionally, he requested complete data on Zishan base's defense and weaponry systems. After issuing his commands, Zhang Yi left the room without saying another word. Karen, curious about Zhang Yi's intentions, did not fully understand his plan. However, Shinsen speculated that Zhang Yi might be preparing for a direct assault on the military base to eliminate his enemies. Even so, she noted that Zhang Yi was extremely cautious and was still considering the significant risks involved in such a mission. Zhang Yi then took a moment to reflect. So far, he had managed to survive Qinyuan's attacks, but he realized that his current situation did not guarantee his safety. Despite the risks, this might be his only opportunity to launch an assault on the base and eliminate his enemies once and for all. Thank you for following this storyline. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content so you won't miss updates on other exciting comic storylines. Zhang Yi reassured himself that even though the initial missile attack might not destroy the base, it would create massive panic. With half a ton of explosives that he had managed to steal from enemy soldiers, he planned to bring down the base from within. He felt that if he could eliminate the enemies inside, that would be enough for him. After solidifying his resolve, Zhang Yi returned to the room and asked Shinsen to show him all the information she had gathered about the base's defenses. He wanted to know everything about his opponents, including the strength of the mutants stationed there. If there was even the slightest weakness, Zhang Yi believed it was an opportunity worth taking. However, he also emphasized the importance of assessing their own strength first. If the power gap was too great, then the plan would not be viable. The genius girl then compiled all the necessary information, including the total number of troops stationed at Zishan base, 521 regular armed soldiers, 6 team leaders who were mutants, and around 50 other mutant soldiers. Additionally, there was a primary leader named Feng, whom Zhang Yi had previously defeated, and who held an S rank rating. The other mutants were mostly A rank or lower, except for one individual with a B rank. Zhang Yi was not too concerned. He knew that mutant rankings were not always accurate, and significant changes could occur in the future. With all the data on the strongest mutants in the base, Zhang Yi printed the report. Following Ken's suggestion, he reassured himself that his allies were capable of handling their adversaries. Once all the information was gathered, Zhang Yi summoned everyone to the living room. Standing before them, he explained that he needed their help to attack Zishan base and wanted to hear their thoughts on the plan. After that, he turned to Uncle Yu, the oldest member of their group, who had a military background. Zhang Yi asked for his opinion. Uncle Yu stated that considering the heavy losses Qinyuan's base had suffered in their last attack against them, it was unlikely that they would simply make peace or leave Zhang Yi alone. He agreed with Zhang Yi's stance that attacking Zishan base was the right move rather than just waiting for the enemy's next assault. Uncle Yu firmly declared that he was ready to fight alongside Zhang Yi until the very end, without regret. Zhang Yi then turned to Chunlei and asked for his opinion on the attack. Chunlei hesitated, wondering if they were truly capable of facing so many mutants and armed soldiers. Zhang Yi sat down and reassured him, saying there was no need to worry about that. Even if they were outnumbered, Zhang Yi himself would handle all the regular soldiers and weaker mutants. He then asked if Chunlei doubted his ability to defeat all the enemies at once and whether Chunlei had no desire to take revenge for the villagers who had been taken to the base. With an awkward expression, Chunlei replied that he didn't care about those people, he didn't even know them, so he had no reason to join the attack. His uncertain response made Zhang Yi feel that Chunlei might not be the most cautious person in the group. However, after some thought, Chunlei finally said that he would help in any way he could. If it was for Zhang Yi, he was willing to risk everything. Zhang Yi smiled at his response and felt satisfied. The three of them finally agreed to work together. Chunlei then asked about the details of their operation. Zhang Yi pulled out a board displaying information about the key mutants they would face. Uncle Yu pointed to one of the mutants he considered a suitable opponent for himself. After that, Zhang Yi asked Shinsen to take them to see the military base's map. As the three of them left the room, Zhang Yi took out his phone and sent a message to Lien, instructing him to hide in a safe place until noon the next day. He informed Lien that they would be evacuating the area and might need his help from inside the base if necessary. Lien responded, agreeing to hide and offering his assistance in any way possible as long as Zhang Yi provided him with more information. Zhang Yi explained that, for now, he couldn't give too many details since the plan wasn't fully developed yet, but he would keep Lien updated as things progressed. A few moments later, Shinsen successfully altered the missile's target coordinates. She informed Zhang Yi that the missiles were now scheduled to strike Zishan base at noon. Zhang Yi thanked Shinsen for her excellent work and started feeling the tension of the impending battle. Not long after, Karen arrived and informed Zhang Yi that although the missiles wouldn't completely destroy the base, they would generate powerful shockwaves capable of affecting everyone inside, similar to an earthquake with a magnitude of 8. Zhang Yi explained that when the shockwave hit, Shinsen would cut off the base's power supply. Since all their defense systems relied on electricity, this would make the invasion much easier. Shinsen added that the power outage would only be temporary, as the base likely had a manual way to restore power. However, Zhang Yi didn't see this as a major issue since there would be enough time for Lien and the students to escape. As usual, Chun asked what they would do to destroy the base once they successfully infiltrated it. Everyone listened in silence. Chun then questioned whether killing the leader would truly solve the problem. Wouldn't someone else just take his place? He suggested that the only way to neutralize the threat was to eliminate everyone inside the base. Finally, Zhang Yi explained that he had a large stockpile of explosives that he had saved when Feng and his subordinates attempted to blow up his fortress some time ago. The supply had been replenished. Karen then described the effects of detonating 1,000 kilograms of explosives. They realized that the explosion would not only destroy the base's oxygen system but also make it difficult to breathe, potentially killing any survivors. Chun then asked how they could enter the base undetected. Zhang Yi instructed everyone to memorize the locations where they needed to plant the explosives and to escape immediately afterward. By wearing scientist lab coats, they would be sufficiently disguised. Zhang Yi emphasized the importance of placing the explosives in the right locations to ensure the base's destruction from within. He reminded everyone to move quickly, as the impact of a 1,000 kilograms explosion would be immense. Zhang Yi then explained their approach to the base and how they would execute the attack. Each team member had a specific role to play, but he stressed that their mission's success was not the top priority, their survival was. Inside the Profer Mountain base, Lien gathered his remaining students, preparing them to escape the next day. They all agreed to help and thanked their teacher for still remembering them. The next morning, Zhang Yi's team took time to recharge while discussing the final details of their plan. Zhang Yi ensured that Chun and Uncle Yu fully understood the assault strategy. He also reviewed the explosive placement locations and what they needed to do afterward. Always attentive, Zhang Yi even took the time to feed his loyal battle cat. He had already prepared a special strategy to deal with the 6 strongest mutant leaders. That night, the air was colder than usual. Uncle Yu, along with his beautiful wife, Zhang Yi, and the women of his group, as well as Chun, who was alone, prepared to carry out their mission. Ear had hoped to accompany Zhang Yi, but he asked her to stay behind so she wouldn't have to worry. They set off, driving a tactical vehicle through the snowstorm, remaining constantly alert. Upon nearing the target location, Zhang Yi administered adrenaline injections to prepare everyone for the mission ahead. He warned that the side effects would only be felt once they had completed the mission and returned home to their wives. They could already feel the power of the bioengineering enhancements coursing through their bodies. As they approached the base entrance, Zhang Yi could hardly wait to deliver his surprise attack. Meanwhile, Lien was gathering his students for their life-saving escape mission. One of the girls hesitated, questioning whether they were truly about to flee. A student who served a greedy woman reminded everyone to stay silent and follow Lien's orders without question. Lien observed carefully. Although he didn't know the exact details of the plan, he understood that now was the right time to wait for its execution. In his office, Chen Yuan was preparing to carry out his threat, ordering the launch of missiles at Zhang Yi's base. He knew it was a massive waste of resources, but unfortunately, it was necessary to maintain his authority. Feng entered the office, and Chen Yuan anticipated his reaction, saying that if the issue concerned Zhang Yi, the great leader had already devised a plan to eliminate that demon. Feng was shocked to hear that their leader had a solution to defeat Zhang Yi, who had remained undefeated even when they had sent large forces against him. Though Feng did not want to doubt his leader's words, he wondered how it was possible for him to have the power to defeat such a formidable opponent. Chen Yuan confidently explained that no mutant was truly invincible. Ultimately, humanity's greatest strength lay in the weapons they had created. He then revealed a map containing information on Zhang Yi's residence, which they had attempted to invade multiple times without success. He planned to turn the place to ashes using missiles. Feng admitted that their leader was highly intelligent, only he had the connections to execute such an operation. They were convinced that this time, Zhang Yi would finally die. The leader stated that they would witness Zhang Yi's defenses crumble together. The two of them waited for the massive explosion that would bring about the long-awaited revenge. After reviewing Zhang Yi's fortress layout, Feng remarked that destroying it with missiles was a waste of resources. Chen Yuan agreed but insisted that it was necessary. There would be no peace as long as someone like Zhang Yi still roamed free. The only problem was that after the destruction of the enemy, Chen Yuan was unsure whether the generals supporting him now would still have a reason to need him in the future. At exactly midnight, Shinsin sat in front of his computer, preparing to execute the plan. Meanwhile, the great general from the neighboring city pressed the button to launch the rockets. The missile launch operation from the Zishan base had begun. As the missiles approached their target, the members of the surveillance and control department began to panic, saying they needed to immediately warn and evacuate the base. However, everything happened so quickly that there was no time to react. In a matter of seconds, what was once a peaceful place turned into a sea of fire. No one in the area had the chance to complain about the cold, snowy weather. At that moment, Zhang Yi was overjoyed and informed the hacker, Shinsin, that their plan had succeeded. Then, with just a single press of a button, the entire energy system of the base was shut down. This threw all the soldiers into a state of panic and fear, as none of them could understand what had caused the communication failure. The most terrified of all was Chen Yuan, who collapsed to the ground in fear, unsure of what to do. However, he soon received a call from the security department informing him that the base had been hit by a missile attack. Upon hearing this, he was filled with rage, believing he had been betrayed by the general who had supported him from the neighboring base. After briefly considering who might be responsible, he refocused his attention on restoring order to the base and attempting to regain control of all systems. He quickly got back on his feet and ordered Feng to gather all the super soldiers and initiate an operation to secure and protect the base. He explained that the most critical area to defend was the 4th floor, where the workers were located, as they might try to take advantage of the chaos to escape. Meanwhile, the guards at the southern entrance, still confused and unable to coordinate with headquarters, suddenly saw a vehicle speeding straight toward one of the base's entrances. These guards were merely ordinary soldiers with no supernatural abilities, making them easy targets. With little effort, the attackers overpowered the entrance, using their strength and weapons to eliminate all the guards and take control of the access point. Now, everything depended on Lien's ability to lead his students out so they could move on to the second phase of their plan. Inside the base, Lien finally understood why he had to wait until midnight to leave. He ordered his students to get ready, telling them that the time to escape had come. They ran in groups toward the main hall. The electricity in the area had been cut off, plunging everything into darkness. The guards could only hear people moving but could do nothing about it. If they fired their weapons, they risked hitting their own comrades. Taking advantage of the situation, Lien successfully led his students past the guards. As they passed, gunshots rang out from where the guards had been positioned. Those who failed to stay close to Lien's group had likely become targets. Lien scolded them, urging them to keep running without looking back. If they hesitated, they would all die. He knew the path ahead was still long, and they would have to reach the nearest exit. Along the way, they might encounter more soldiers. Sure enough, just before reaching the exit, they came face to face with 2 soldiers standing guard. The soldiers struggled to see in the darkness, but before they could react, their heads were severed in an instant. Eliminated. Lien quickly ordered his students to continue moving up the stairs. Though they could hardly believe they were finally escaping, they also knew that nothing in this world ever came easy. Just as they thought they were in the clear, they found themselves face to face with Qinyuan's secretary, who was accompanied by a large squad of armed soldiers. As usual, the woman praised her leader, stating that he had been right to anticipate an escape attempt. She admitted that they had expected the new arrivals, mere peasants, to rebel and try to flee. However, they had never imagined that Lien would return to the base after escaping, just to save these unfortunate students. Lien tried to calm the woman down, suggesting they talk and negotiate. But she refused, declaring that betrayal of the Shinshan base could never be forgiven, a traitor would always be a traitor, and there would be no mercy. Before she could say more, a sudden gunshot rang out, piercing the skull of one of her soldiers. Zhang Yi had arrived, eliminating the guards. The secretary immediately ordered the remaining soldiers to focus their attacks on Zhang Yi and to kill him at once. Meanwhile, Lien ordered his students to stay put. He needed to help Zhang Yi. Without hesitation, he rushed forward and joined the fight, striking down the guards. The unfortunate soldiers found themselves trapped in a hellish battle, attacked from both sides, Zhang Yi and his elite team on one side, Lien on the other. Before long, the enemy was completely overwhelmed. Lien thanked Zhang Yi for his support, to which Zhang Yi responded that it was well deserved. However, he reminded Lien that there was no need for gratitude. He knew all too well that eliminating these soldiers wouldn't be easy. Lien had been attacking from behind, dealing the final blows to many of them. Zhang Yi then gave the order to retreat from the area. Lien's students, still shaken from the intense battle, were unsure of what to do next. Meanwhile, Secretary Julie pretended to hide, closing her eyes tightly in hopes that no one would notice her. But when she heard Lien's voice, she immediately tried to defend herself, insisting that it wasn't her fault, that she was merely a secretary following orders. Tian, who was nearby, stopped the woman in her tracks. She pleaded for mercy, claiming her innocence. But just hearing her words enraged the boy. Without hesitation, he performed a perfect operation on her vocal cords, silencing her forever, an act witnessed by his teacher, Lien. Lien felt proud that his student had become such an extraordinary surgeon. Now, Lien could finally thank Zhang Yi and ask for the second part of their agreement. Zhang Yi assured him that the guards at the entrance had already been put to sleep. He then took food and supplies from his dimensional storage to aid in their escape. However, Zhang Yi warned Lien to stay behind and help attack another section of the base. The students could escape on their own. Naturally, the students were terrified at the thought of leaving without Lien's protection. Zhang Yi explained that all the soldiers outside were already dead. But he also reminded the students that their enemies would surely send reinforcements to hunt down the escapees. Lien felt uneasy at the thought, but Zhang Yi's reasoning was undeniable. This was their perfect chance to eliminate the threat once and for all. Lien agreed to stay and join the elite team in destroying the base from within. For a moment, he hesitated, reflecting on Zhang Yi's words. Did he truly want to obliterate this base? He knew that many innocent people still remained inside. But in the end, he realized there was no other solution. He instructed Tian to lead and protect the students, promising to meet them later. With that, the group finally left the base. They were free. After deciding to help, Zhang Yi reminded everyone that their time was limited. He pointed out key strategic locations where they needed to plant explosives. Their group moved swiftly, wearing helmets and blending in with the soldiers, remaining undetected. When they reached the first location, Zhang Yi signaled that they could begin planting the explosives. Lien wanted to know how they could destroy such a heavily fortified place. Zhang Yi pulled out dozens of explosives from his dimensional storage and stated that he never questioned even a single grain of rice. The enemy had provided all the materials needed to destroy their own base. Once they had finished at that location, they continued their mission, planting more devices along the way. Lien tried to argue that they could simply kill Qinyuan's leader instead of blowing up the entire place and killing innocent people. He gripped his sword tightly, displeased by the thought of condemning the innocent. Zhang Yi paused for a moment before firmly stating that such an approach was impossible. If they only eliminated the leader, someone else would replace him. The real problem was the system itself. Lien had to admit that Zhang Yi was right. Zhang Yi insisted that it was better to destroy the entire base. Their conversation was abruptly interrupted when a squad of soldiers arrived and demanded to know who they were. One of the soldiers noticed an animal standing near the group and reminded them that pets were not allowed in the facility. Zhang Yi did not wait for their reaction. With a cold glare, he immediately fired a shot, hitting the enemy soldier directly in the forehead. The other soldiers, witnessing the sudden kill, tried to return fire. But Zhang Yi remained calm, using his abilities to deflect their attacks while waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. Lien observed this and recalled how Zhang Yi had once been nervous and uncertain when they first met. Now, he was completely different, calm, confident, and immensely powerful. The transformation sent chills down Lien's spine. The soldiers, realizing that they were up against a powerful mutant, called for reinforcements and ordered everyone to spread out. Zhang Yi smirked. "It's too late," he muttered. Using his ability, he summoned back the bullets he had stored in his dimensional space. The projectiles struck their targets with perfect accuracy. The few soldiers who survived tried to take cover behind their comrades, thinking they could hide and survive. Zhang Yi calmly tossed an explosive guava fruit, eliminating them all in an instant. The group continued running through the base, determined to complete their mission. The handsome young man remained alert. He knew they couldn't afford to stay here for too long. As he ran, he noticed the lights in the facility beginning to turn back on. Immediately, he shouted for everyone to get out as soon as possible. Meanwhile, inside his office, Qinyuan received the report that the electrical systems had been restored, and that Zhang Yi had infiltrated the base alongside the traitor, Lien. The leader donned his powerful armor, ready to enter the battlefield. Feng and his troops were furious, burning with a thirst for vengeance against Zhang Yi. One of Feng's soldiers pointed out that explosives had been planted throughout the facility. Enraged, Feng roared for the bomb squad to be called in immediately while ordering the rest of his men to follow him in pursuit of Zhang Yi. In one of the corridors, Lien's group found themselves cornered from both sides. Pamanu stepped forward, declaring that he would provide cover for everyone. He tensed his muscles, causing his shirt to rip apart before he charged at the enemy like an unstoppable bull. Pamanu was like a living tank, bullets bounced off his body, unable to harm him. He shouted for the others to move forward and continue planting explosives while he held off the enemy forces. He assured them that he would be fine. His body was incredibly durable, and his regeneration abilities were extraordinary. When a stronger group of soldiers decided to attack him with swords, Pamanu opened his arms wide and declared, "No one shall pass." They all attacked at once, only to be instantly overpowered. It was as if nothing had happened. They were like mere insects before him. Pamanu's attacks were so devastating that his enemies' bodies were left splattered against the walls. Witnessing this, Zhang Yi felt satisfied and smirked. Did they really think artificial mutants could compare to natural-born ones like Pamanu? Pamanu, still surprised by the destruction he had caused, hesitated. He hadn't realized that his attack had been that powerful. Turning to Zhang Yi, he expressed his desire to meet a true mutant, someone on his level, to test his strength. Zhang Yi, maintaining his calm demeanor, simply replied, "That is not something you should wish for." Before they could continue, the three of them were stunned when one of the most powerful mutants in the base appeared before them. Standing alone was a man with a peculiar mustache. Without hesitation, Zhang Yi attacked with his full power. But the man swiftly demonstrated why he was one of the strongest. His mastery over fire was undeniable. Flames erupted from his body, melting the surrounding walls. If they didn't move forward now, they would soon be trapped, until more mutants arrived. Zhang Yi asked Chunlei for assistance. Chunlei launched an attack using his powers, but the fire mutant easily dodged it. Realizing this, the fire mutant decided to use a special fuel he had created, one that would amplify his flames tenfold. As he ignited the enhanced fire, he boldly challenged everyone to withstand his attack. A blazing inferno surged toward Zhang Yi at an incredible speed. However, Chunlei's power successfully blocked the attack and even managed to wound the fire mutant. Seizing the opportunity, the muscular Pamanu prepared to strike down their enemy. But before he could attack, he was suddenly hit by an immensely powerful punch, sending him flying several meters backward. Zhang Yi was shocked. Standing before them was none other than Feng, the super-strong mutant he had believed to be buried beneath an avalanche. Seeing the person who had humiliated him before, Feng felt a surge of motivation to take his revenge. Hearing his uncle's voice, Zhang Yi quickly created a protective barrier to check if he was alright. The man who once craved a true battle to test his strength now found himself with a shattered arm, completely devastated by Feng's attack. The captain regained his composure. He knew that the only way out for his enemies was through him, Feng, and the fire-healed man. They could easily block any escape. On the other side of the corridor, Chunlei looked worried about Uncle Yu and asked if he could still continue. Zhang Yi took something from his storage space and applied it to Uncle Yu, explaining that it would grant him the strength to suppress his pain and continue fighting. The mutant cat grew restless, sensing the imminent danger, but its owner calmed it down, assuring it that there was nothing to worry about. Feng and his allies declared that their enemies were completely cornered, with no way out. They all had to pay the price for their actions. Feng then taunted Zhang Yi, wondering if he still hoped to break through them. Meanwhile, Chun was still battling soldiers while Pamanu held onto his wrist to keep him from falling. Even though the situation looked dire, Zhang Yi remained confident that he could defeat them all. However, his confidence was shattered when a mutant with the power to create illusions launched a direct attack on him. The genjutsu-like technique manipulated the enemy's perception, striking directly at the mind. However, instead of Zhang Yi, the one who truly felt its effect was the girl beside him. Something terrifying caused her to collapse, and those nearby felt traces of the illusion's effects as well. Zhang Yi mentioned that brainwaves and genjutsu-like illusions could be reflected back with his powers. The mutant cat then transformed, and Zhang Yi and his entire group escaped by riding it. Under the influence of hypnosis, they successfully slipped past the soldiers. As they made their way out, Zhang Yi left a trail of grenades behind. By the time Feng managed to move again, he was instantly engulfed in flames. Chunlei, who was closer to the explosion, felt the searing heat burning his body. Zhang Yi issued a warning that once they got out, he would activate the explosives. Time was running out to destroy the entire base. The soldiers desperately knocked down the walls of the facility to escape. They then entered another section of the base, where one of the mutant soldiers possessed a power similar to Pamanu's. Additionally, he had the ability to enlarge his body, just like the mutant cat. Now appearing like a towering titan, he carried fellow mutant soldiers in his hands, bringing them ever closer. Chunlei shouted for the cat to run faster. Soon, they managed to exit through the base's gate, but the enemy soldiers had also reached the exit. Now that they were outside, Feng felt that this was an even better battleground to defeat Zhang Yi. Feng's strength was only effective in one direction, but now, they could attack Zhang Yi from all sides. Chunlei started to grow anxious, but Zhang Yi remained calm. Feng noticed his composure but was convinced that the advantage was now theirs. The captain challenged them to survive their attacks now. Unlike before, this time, Zhang Yi had no impenetrable fortress to hide behind. Zhang Yi smirked at the situation, sarcastically remarking that their fortress would soon be gone as well. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small detonator and pressed the button while locking eyes with the enemy soldiers. A thunderous explosion followed immediately. The entire area shook violently as if a real earthquake had struck. Behind them, the entrance to the Qishan base erupted in a massive blast. The devastating explosion sent soldiers flying through the air from the sheer impact. Chunlei even celebrated their team's victory. However, shortly after the explosion, their enemies emerged from beneath the snow. Feng roared at Zhang Yi, accusing him of being a demon for doing such a thing. Zhang Yi then asked if they remembered the explosives they had used before, the same ones they had planned to use to blow up his bunker. A realization struck Feng, causing the fire in his eyes to dim. The very explosives that had destroyed their base had been taken by Zhang Yi himself. With a firm voice, Zhang Yi explained that all of this was a direct consequence of their own actions. As he stared at the destruction behind him, Feng began to feel guilt creeping in. After all, they had planned to do the exact same thing to Zhang Yi. Even so, Feng swore that Zhang Yi would pay for everything. Zhang Yi urged Feng to stop, stating that a fight between them would only lead to more needless casualties among their followers. Furthermore, Zhang Yi reminded him that revenge was meaningless, because it was Qishan base that had attacked his home first. With so many witnesses, Feng could no longer deny the truth. He was forced to admit that he was nothing more than a robber. But now, only two paths remained: either Zhang Yi would live, or Feng would. Zhang Yi smiled and asked if Feng's only desire was to kill him and no one else. Seething with rage, Feng confirmed that was exactly what he wanted. Zhang Yi then stepped closer and suggested that they settle this as leaders who hated each other, without involving their followers. At that moment, Lien tried to stop Zhang Yi, warning him that Feng was an incredibly powerful mutant. However, Zhang Yi insisted that this was the best course of action for both sides. If he died, his friends would have the chance to escape and survive. But if he won, he could ensure the safety of a few reliable allies. Hearing these words, Feng had no objections. With determination, Zhang Yi openly challenged him to a duel, just the two of them. Chun and Pamanu, who were listening, fell silent, recalling the moment they first embarked on this mission. Zhang Yi told his followers that the upcoming battle was nearly impossible for them to win. That was why he planned to fight Feng one-on-one. He also pointed out that they didn't fully understand his abilities and had assumed he was just a coward hiding behind his defenses. Now, Zhang Yi boldly stepped forward to face Feng. On the other side, Feng's followers warned him that Zhang Yi was planning something and urged him to fight together with them. However, Feng was confident in his own strength. He believed he was stronger than Zhang Yi. But there was a possibility that Lien could be troublesome. Zhang Yi also had followers with enhanced strength and powerful abilities. If a full-scale battle broke out, Feng knew that he and his group could be overwhelmed. Feng raised his finger and declared that they should accept the duel, just between him and Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi confirmed that his team agreed to the terms. They would not interfere and would ensure that everyone else stayed out of the fight. The two men then stepped forward to fight, while the others retreated to a safe distance, knowing how dangerous the battle would be. Chun wondered if Zhang Yi was truly confident that he could defeat a monster like Feng. Meanwhile, Feng's followers approached Zhang Yi's group, claiming that they would reveal a secret about their leader, because Zhang Yi was about to die. A girl explained that it seemed they were unaware of something important. She continued, revealing that some mutants had the ability to absorb the powers of other gifted individuals. The more they absorbed, the faster their strength would grow. Their captain, Feng, had previously fought against an enemy military base, where he had killed 3 incredibly powerful ability users and absorbed their powers, making him nearly invincible. The one they called Zhang Yi was going to die without even knowing what he was truly up against. Chun was angered by this and firmly stated that their leader would not die. He wouldn't risk his life unless he believed he could win. Meanwhile, Zhang Yi was speaking with Feng. He apologized, explaining that his abilities were more suited for support rather than direct combat. So, why couldn't they simply choose not to fight? This enraged Feng even more. He roared that there was no turning back now. Zhang Yi then said that he only wished for a peaceful life in this post-apocalyptic world. Finally, he asked Feng to promise that if he lost, his friends would be allowed to live. The furious captain ignored Zhang Yi's words and suddenly launched an attack. Not backing down, the hero charged forward, using his abilities. However, Feng dodged with ease. He knew that Zhang Yi couldn't change the direction of his attacks. Just then, a massive truck nearly crushed Feng. Zhang Yi smirked and said, "This is only the beginning." Suddenly, dozens of vehicles and machines that Zhang Yi had collected earlier appeared. He hadn't initially thought they would be useful in battle, but now, they were. Feng remained alert as objects were hurled toward him. He swiftly sliced a truck in half with a single strike. Zhang Yi continued to launch a barrage of objects, but the super-strong and fast warrior managed to evade them all. With portals appearing everywhere, Feng was unable to strike back. The objects kept coming, one after another. Then, something strange began to happen. Suddenly, a piece of cloth covered his vision. Next, fuel barrels came flying toward him. This time, he couldn't cut through or evade them. Zhang Yi then pulled out his favorite weapon and ignited the fuel with a single shot. Now, Feng was engulfed in flames, even in the middle of a snowy landscape. Feng seemed to have a high resistance to fire, or perhaps his clothing had some special properties. Although the flames didn't injure him, they obscured his vision. Losing sight of his target, he started to lose control of his emotions again. Zhang Yi continued throwing an increasingly bizarre assortment of objects at him. Surrounded by fire and overwhelmed with frustration, Feng's rage only grew stronger. But then, something unexpected happened. Zhang Yi threw a pile of trash at him. Though Feng remained physically unharmed, he now looked like a madman on the brink of a mental breakdown, his fury burning brighter than ever. Then, Zhang Yi threw something. This time, it wasn't just an ordinary object. The barrels he tossed emitted a strong scent that Feng immediately recognized. It was the smell of seafood. With a firm voice, Zhang Yi declared that no one in this world was truly invincible, everyone had a weakness. He had discovered Feng's weakness thanks to information provided by Xin, who revealed that Feng had a severe allergy to seafood. Despite this, Zhang Yi continued to taunt Feng while skillfully avoiding close combat. He then hurled luxurious cars at him, forcing Feng into a desperate struggle. After some time, Feng finally collapsed, motionless. Zhang Yi eyed him suspiciously, unable to believe that his formidable enemy had truly fallen. Taking a cautious step back, he decided to rest, eat, and warm himself. Several minutes passed. Suddenly, the fallen man stirred. Feng rose once again and resumed his pursuit of Zhang Yi. However, despite pushing himself to the limit, he could no longer catch up. His body finally gave out, and he collapsed once more, cursing the small creature that had bested him. He hadn't lost in pure combat, but he felt humiliated, defeated by such a disgraceful tactic. Zhang Yi set up camp and waited. Exactly 30 minutes later, after finishing his meal, he decided to check whether Feng was truly down for good. He fired a shot at Feng's head. No reaction. Zhang Yi stepped closer, puzzled. Had he really defeated the arrogant captain from the Shounen base? To be sure, he conducted another test, throwing a truck onto Feng's body. Still, there was no response. However, Zhang Yi remained wary. This could simply be an act. To confirm, he drew his sword and did something that cannot be visually described here. At last, it seemed that the captain was truly dead. Zhang Yi approached to claim his trophy. As he did, he realized that he was absorbing Feng's power, just as he had done before. Once the process was complete, he felt an overwhelming surge of strength. However, moments later, his vision blurred, and he lost sight completely for a brief moment. When his sight returned, something shocking had happened. His vision had changed. He could now distort objects from a distance, and even destroy anything he laid his eyes upon. A sinister grin spread across his face. Not long after, the darkness within him began to emerge. With this newfound power, he could finally fight against mutants immune to gunfire. Every risk he had taken to face Feng had led to an incredible reward. However, despite just eating, he quickly realized that this ability drained a massive amount of energy. Perhaps he could only use it 3 times a day. Still, it was far more effective than being a mere sniper. Zhang Yi now found himself wondering, who would be his next victim? On the other side, one of the girls from Feng's team observed the battle from a distance, wondering why it was taking so long. Her comrade responded, saying that their captain was probably just toying with his enemy. They only needed to trust in their captain's strength and wait for him to emerge victorious. Meanwhile, Zhang Yi's allies laughed, confident that if the battle was dragging on, it meant their leader's strategy was working perfectly. Then, confirmation of the winner came through their earpieces. Zhang Yi gave a direct order: no one was to speak, only listen. He didn't want Feng's followers to realize that he had won. His allies were filled with joy but followed his instructions obediently. Shortly after, Zhang Yi arrived at the location where Feng's remaining followers were. He immediately used his Rinnegan on the girl with hypnosis powers, as she was the most dangerous among them. She let out a terrified scream before collapsing lifelessly. Then, Zhang Yi stepped forward, revealing the trophy he had claimed. His words sent shockwaves through Feng's forces. They couldn't believe that their leader had been slain by someone they had always considered weak. And so, the battle between the two factions erupted. Feng's remaining followers unleashed their strongest attacks in a desperate struggle. But Zhang Yi roared, declaring that not a single one of them would be allowed to live. Within seconds, they were completely overwhelmed by 3 incredibly powerful fighters. At that moment, Zhang Yi rushed toward the fallen bodies to absorb their energy. All of them had natural-born abilities, not artificially enhanced powers. However, something unexpected happened. Zhang Yi was shocked. He couldn't absorb their powers at all. He couldn't understand why this was happening when he had successfully absorbed Feng's abilities before. He called Chun and Yu to try absorbing their powers, but they also failed. Zhang Yi then noticed a mutant cat approaching the corpse of a fire-type mutant. It devoured the body, seemingly unfazed. Zhang Yi, still confused, wondered if the cat could absorb abilities or not. However, the feline showed no signs of transformation, it had simply found itself a good meal. Afterward, they returned to the entrance of the Shenzhen base, where Zhang Yi positioned a truck in front of the entrance. Lian, curious, asked what he was planning. Zhang Yi simply smirked and told her that she would soon see. Moments later, a massive explosion erupted at the base's entrance. Lian finally understood Zhang Yi's plan. Now, everyone trapped inside had no chance of escape. Zhang Yi then prepared vehicles for his team and quickly ordered them to move to another location. As they drove, Zhang Yi searched for information on his phone about the Shenzhen base. He wanted to find out if there were any hidden escape routes. Soon after, they spotted a group of people in the distance. Lian's eyes widened in shock and rage. The man attempting to escape in front of them was Chen Ziyuan, the leader of the base. Chen Ziyuan was stunned that he had been found so quickly. His mind raced. Why was Zhang Yi after him? Zhang Yi and Lian stepped out of the vehicle. Zhang Yi calmly walked forward and asked, "Why is the arrogant man so silent now?" Chen Ziyuan raised both hands, showing he was unarmed. He then stated that he was an important figure. If he died now, the power balance of the city would be disrupted. If that happened, even more dangerous demons would arrive to seize control. His words made Zhang Yi pause for a moment. Perhaps he was right. But in the next instant, Zhang Yi snapped out of it. He coldly declared that no one cared about Chen Ziyuan anymore. Besides, he was in no position to negotiate. At that moment, the cowardly leader begged for his life, claiming he had only done whatever it took to survive and protect his followers. Then, he tried to tempt Zhang Yi, suggesting that with his incredible talent and network, they could dominate the entire city together. Zhang Yi was sick of hearing nonsense. Without another word, he activated his power. In an instant, Chen Ziyuan's head was severed from his body. His soldiers, shocked and terrified, dropped their weapons, realizing they had no hope of survival. Zhang Yi had no mercy. Desperate, the remaining soldiers grabbed grenades and rushed at him, hoping for a final chance to face the demon who had slaughtered their leader. But Zhang Yi merely kicked them away, and the grenades were absorbed into his alternate dimension. At this point, he was like an unstoppable god. The men could do nothing but writhe on the ground, begging for their lives. Yet Zhang Yi showed no hesitation. He returned the grenades to them. And in an instant, everything turned into a gruesome scene of destruction. The few remaining soldiers were lucky, because they were simply sent to a quicker death in Zhang Yi's alternate dimension. Meanwhile, Zhang Yi set the fallen bodies on fire. Lian, watching the horror unfold, hesitated. Was this really necessary? She asked. Zhang Yi was always too cautious. But to him, this was just routine. Without a shred of remorse, he explained. It's only natural for me to erase all evidence. Lian started to reflect on his words. Now, they were finally free to go home. But before leaving, she remembered her duty. She still had to deliver them to her students. After some time driving, the group finally arrived at Building 25. The very place where this story began. Everyone who had survived was there, waiting for their teacher before leaving. Zhang Yi reminded Lian that he had not forgotten their agreement. He explained that in Chun's village, which was near this location, many houses were left empty after most of the villagers had died. Lian wanted him to take all the survivors there. However, Zhang Yi responded that their deal did not include that. If she wanted anything beyond their original agreement, she would have to pay extra. Lian was surprised. She thought they had become friends, so he should be willing to do this for her. Zhang Yi smirked and replied, "We are friends. That's why you'll get a discount. But nothing comes for free." Since Lian had nothing to offer him at the moment, she decided she would take care of them herself. Zhang Yi then bid farewell to his friend. As Lian walked away, Zhang Yi cast a lingering gaze, one that revealed his true personality. Silently, he thought to himself, I don't care about Lian's students. But I need to maintain a good relationship with her. Someone that powerful? I can't afford to let her go. Lian returned to Building 25, where her students were waiting. She found them burning furniture to keep warm. Approaching them, she asked if they were all right. But instead of answering, they demanded to know why Zhang Yi had left. Isn't he supposed to bring us food and take care of us? One of them asked. Lian sighed and explained that Zhang Yi would be back soon and that he would take them to a better place. When they heard that the new location was a farming village with houses and fishing opportunities, the students grew angry. They questioned why Ken and Chernin were allowed to live in the same village as Zhang Yi, while they were being sent somewhere else. They complained that those two girls got to live in a much better place than they did. Frustrated, they demanded that Lian speak to Zhang Yi and arrange for them to live in the same place as Ken and Chernin. At that moment, Lian lost her patience. She yelled, saying that this conversation was over. Anything is better than being stuck in that base, she snapped. She then sat down, exhausted, and told them to get some rest. Tomorrow morning, Zhang Yi would take them to the village. The next day, Zhang Yi was seen sitting in his car, making a phone call. He told his uncle to pack his belongings and move closer to him, to his safe house. The place was filled with luxurious homes, and Zhang Yi believed it was better for them to stay close together so they could protect each other. His uncle agreed, acknowledging that teamwork was important. Besides, Tianhai City had other military forces besides them. This was concerning. But at the same time, the three of them alone had already wiped out over 1,000 people in a single night. They were the greatest threat to the city now. And from now on, they would live together. After that, Zhang Yi stepped out of his car and headed to Building 25 to collect supplies and take his group to their new homes. Upon arriving, he was greeted by his uncle's wife, who was overjoyed to see him safe. Then, he noticed Ken standing silently beside them. He approached her and embraced her gently, whispering soft words in her ear. Without Ken, this victory wouldn't have been possible, he admitted. If not for her and her bombs, we would have never succeeded. Meanwhile, Mingti, watching from a distance, couldn't help but wonder why she wasn't getting the same level of attention. At that moment, Zhang Yi's gaze shifted to Chernin, who stood nearby. With a knowing smile, he said, "The greatest reward belongs to her." Later, Zhang Yi gathered everyone for an important discussion. His uncle wanted to know what their leader had planned next. Zhang Yi announced that they would be moving back to his larger safe house. That location had many luxury homes that could be used as residences. Zhou Haimi breathed a sigh of relief. That place was his home. He had worked his entire life to buy a house in that condominium. Zhang Yi then explained, "We're all leaving this apartment complex. We'll leave supplies behind, though. This place will become our emergency base." The girls packed their suitcases, and Zhang Yi locked up their first hideout. The place where it all began. Just then, Zhang Yi noticed Lian hiding at the end of the hallway. She admitted that everyone had been on edge since last night, terrified after hearing the explosion from the west. But Zhang Yi simply shrugged. "That doesn't matter," he said casually. "I'm fine. And I'm leaving soon." Shortly after, everyone arrived at Zhang Yi's safe house. He instructed Chun Lei and his uncle to rest for the day. Tomorrow, they could choose any of the luxury homes in the condominium to live in. After that, Zhang Yi entered his own home, his mutant cat following behind him. He locked the door, leaned against it, and let out a breath. "Finally. I can't believe it. I can finally sleep." After an entire month of torment, he could finally rest. The next morning, we returned to Lian and her students. They had finally arrived at Shu village. Some of the villagers chose to stay behind, refusing to be taken to Shan's base. Of course, the villagers, who hadn't seen Lian since she had joined Feng's gang, feared her. They suspected she might be a spy. Meanwhile, Lian was growing anxious. She knew that the supplies Zhang Yi had given them wouldn't last long. She also knew the truth. Her students were weak. None of them had the skills to fish in the river and survive in Shu village. Lian thought that the only alternative was to leave the village and ask Zhang Yi for more food. Meanwhile, back at Zhang Yi's safe house, he was spending time with Zakir. Zakir mentioned that things were calm for now, and they should start considering having a child. Zhang Yi responded, saying that it made no sense to have a child at this moment. They would have to take care of it every single day, and right now, their situation was still unstable. He tried to reassure Zakir, telling her that the future was still uncertain. However, when he saw the sad expression on his wife's face, he realized something. In truth, Zhang Yi had no intention of having children. To him, a child would just be one more life to worry about. But to Zakir, this was important. She wanted to have a child to strengthen their love. Every day, more women were arriving at the safe house, and in her heart, having a child would be a guarantee that she would always have a place in Zhang Yi's heart. Zhang Yi could read her thoughts clearly. And so, he came up with a solution. He suggested that Zakir should focus on keeping her body attractive, maintaining her beautiful face, and practicing feminine charm techniques. His answer shocked her. She was furious that he could say something like that. "Besides," she said, "how am I supposed to practice feminine charm techniques all by myself?" At that moment, Zhang Yi's uncle knocked on their bedroom door. Having overheard part of their conversation, he felt embarrassed and quickly changed the subject. He informed Zhang Yi that Lian was asking for him. Zhang Yi immediately got up and went downstairs, telling Uncle Mi that he was busy. Then, putting on a friendly demeanor, he went to meet Lian. He greeted her politely and invited her to sit. He was exceptionally courteous, because he knew that she was about to ask him for something. Lian explained the difficulties she and her students were facing. Zhang Yi sighed and said, "A skilled woman like you, suffering and working hard for others, how pitiful." He then made her an offer. She could stay with him in the safe house. After hearing Zhang Yi's proposal, Lian declined. She reminded him of their agreement. They were allies, their goal was to destroy Shishuan's base together. Once that was done, Zhang Yi had promised to provide food and shelter for her and her students for a while. Now that the enemy base was gone, there was no longer a food shortage to worry about. However, she still needed more supplies because her students had become too spoiled. It would take time for them to become independent and find their own food. Zhang Yi frowned. "How did this happen?" he asked. They already suffered so much in Shishuan's base. I thought they would be stronger. Lien didn't want to talk about it anymore. She simply asked him if he could provide food for a little longer. She would figure out a solution later. Zhang Yi was a man of his word. He took out a large amount of food from his dimensional storage and handed it to Lien. This should be enough for you and your students for half a month, he said. Lien was deeply grateful for his generosity. Zhang Yi simply replied, "You deserve it." But then, a thought crossed his mind. Is it really safe for a woman to be responsible for so many young students? He asked. Lien let out a heavy sigh. His words struck a chord in her heart. Ever since the apocalypse began, she had worked tirelessly as both a teacher and a protector. Yet, despite everything she had sacrificed, her students never truly appreciated what she had done for them. Even so, she refused to abandon them. They wouldn't survive on their own, she said firmly. If I leave them, I'll never be able to forgive myself. Zhang Yi felt a pang of sadness. Lien was completely ignoring her own well-being just to serve others. That was something he would never do. But then, an idea suddenly came to him. Zhang Yi could help Lien free herself from the responsibility of her students. Maybe after that, she could leave them and join him. Zhang Yi still vividly remembered how they treated Shinsen, even threatening her with death. Shaking off his thoughts, Zhang Yi asked Lien why most of her spoiled students, who were already over 18, still depended on her like children who weren't even her own. After their agreement ended, how would they feed themselves? This question frustrated Lien. She had hoped they would grow up and become independent after everything they had experienced at Shishuan's base, but she had been wrong. Zhang Yi told Lien that he understood the difficulties she was facing with her students, and he decided to help. Lien was shocked and asked what he meant. Zhang Yi replied that, as she knew, he had many resources, and it would be easy for him to provide food for Lien and her students indefinitely. Lien immediately realized that this wouldn't come for free. She directly asked what Zhang Yi wanted in return. His answer stunned her. He wanted her entire life. Lien blushed and shouted that she would never sell her body. That was an insane request? Zhang Yi laughed and told her she hadn't even let him finish talking. What he wanted was for Lien to become his martial arts instructor. How could she think of something so indecent? Feeling embarrassed, Lien apologized for her misunderstanding. Shinsen, who had been eavesdropping on their conversation, secretly wondered if Zhang Yi also had romantic feelings for their teacher. Lien, having made her decision, accepted the offer to help her students. 10 people are better than none, she thought. After Lien left, Zhang Yi felt relieved. Just then, Shinsen and Karen arrived. Zhang Yi told them they were too late. Lien had already left. But they weren't there to see Lien. Shinsen suddenly asked if Zhang Yi also wanted to play with Lien. Her words shocked him. Ken teased, saying he didn't realize his brother had an interest in their teacher. Shinsen became irritated and explained that throughout history, providing help was the most effective way to build alliances. Zhang Yi listened as Shinsen continued, saying that Lien was strong and, from a woman's perspective, she was quite attractive. She then praised Zhang Yi's wisdom in using Lien to strengthen their group. Although Zhang Yi wanted Lien to join them for future battles, he had no romantic interest in her. But Shinsen and Karen were determined to gain Lien's trust. They knew their teacher well and understood how to influence her. However, Zhang Yi told them it wasn't necessary. Given Lien's current situation, convincing her to join them would be easy. Shinsen had a mischievous look in her eyes, but Zhang Yi didn't want to risk Lien turning against them. Shinsen then informed Zhang Yi that in the coming days, she would be analyzing the information they had gathered from Shishuan's base. However, she could already confirm the presence of powerful organizations in Tianhai City, some possibly even stronger than Shishuan. Zhang Yi had expected this. Tianhai was a major city, so it was impossible for only one dominant force to exist there. Shinsen then asked what they would do if all these forces united against them. With confidence, Zhang Yi reassured her that they were a force to be feared. Anyone who saw them would think twice before making a move. Hearing his words, Shinsen felt excited and even more confident. She said she would organize all the information and invite Zhang Yi to review it. He looked forward to it. A little while later, Zhang Yi called Karen over for an important discussion. Once they sat down, he explained that he no longer wanted to be caught off guard like before. He wanted to be fully prepared for future attacks. Zhang Yi asked for Karen's help in turning their 3 houses into a fortress strong enough to withstand enemy assaults. Karen replied that designing the plan was easy, but she wasn't sure if they had enough materials, machinery, and manpower to complete the construction. Zhang Yi reminded her that he could transport any materials using his dimensional power, that his uncle Yu had the strength of 100 men, and that Chun could control snow. Hearing this, Karen realized that although they were few in number, they were highly skilled and powerful. With that confidence, Zhang Yi felt they could build the necessary defenses. He then asked Ken to immediately draft a defense plan. Next, Zhang Yi gathered his team and showed them the locations in the village where they would be living. He emphasized that they would all stay together to make it easier to fortify all the designated areas at once. Additionally, the other villages had weaker defenses compared to their homes, so they needed to complete this project as soon as possible. Chun realized that even though he was strong, if an enemy attacked his home and struck him on the head, he could still die. Uncle Yu reminded them that if they were going to fortify multiple houses, they also needed to consider weapons to defend against attacks. Zhang Yi admitted that he hadn't thought about that yet. With so many areas to protect, they needed significant firepower. He then proposed going to the ruins of the Shounen base to salvage any useful materials from the debris. His uncle suggested that they dismantle any remaining defenses at the ruins and reassemble them here. After deep thought, Zhang Yi came up with a brilliant idea. They could utilize Chunlei's powers to build massive walls from blocks of ice. He pointed out the exact locations where they could construct these barriers. With Chun's abilities, they would be able to create a fortress surrounded by an ice wall. Meanwhile, the two brilliant minds, Shinsen and Karen, were playing a game with two other intelligent individuals, Jaime and Yangam, while Zaeki served drinks. Zhang Yi remarked that caution could never be excessive. Chun was unaware that there were still dangerous groups lurking outside. Zhang Yi responded that, indeed, there were, but those groups weren't even considered a real threat. Nevertheless, they had to build a stronger base as soon as possible. Zhang Yi then ordered everyone to head out and collect materials from the ruins of the Shounen base. However, an unexpected visitor arrived. Lien appeared at the entrance of Zhang Yi's house. Chun wondered if Zhang Yi had gotten himself another woman, but Zhang Yi clarified that Lien came every day to teach him martial arts and that their relationship was nothing more than that. Lien was invited inside and was surprised to see so many people in the house. It felt warm and welcoming, like a big family. She even saw some of her former students, whom she hadn't met in a long time. Shinsen and Karen expressed that they always felt safe with Zhang Yi. Shinsen even jokingly suggested that she could ask her brother, Zhang Yi, to let Lien stay with them too. However, Lien firmly refused to leave her students behind. Shin didn't give up and pointed out that Lien could live there and still help her students. If not, she would remain their servant forever. Hearing this, Lien wondered if Zhang Yi would truly allow her to stay in his house. She then asked her former students if it wouldn't be selfish to abandon the others back in the village. Shinsen responded that she could convince Zhang Yi to let Lien stay. As for the other students, no matter where they lived, their living conditions wouldn't change. Shin knew that Zhang Yi's plan was to find a way to make Lien stay while leaving her students unprotected. When the time came, they would be removed from the equation. Lien said she would think about it, and the girls waited for her answer. After their conversation, Zhang Yi invited Lien to attend her first martial arts lesson. He noticed that her clothes were dirty and gave her a set of luxurious new ones. Feeling embarrassed, Lien said she needed to bathe and change into clean clothes before training. When she returned in her fresh, elegant attire, her confidence grew. Zhang Yi then commanded the training to begin. 2 hours later, Zhang Yi was exhausted, while Master Lien hadn't even broken a sweat. Wearing her new outfit, she reminded Zhang Yi that becoming a master took years of dedication. However, Zhang Yi only wanted to be able to defend himself better if needed. The world was unpredictable, and he had to be prepared. She then said they would continue training tomorrow and gave him some food to take home. Lien recalled Shinsen's words and thought that if it were Zhang Yi saying them, she would be convinced that he was planning something for her students. What she didn't know was that Shinsen was far more ruthless and dangerous than Zhang Yi. Lien began to wonder if she could really stay here and be accepted. On her way back, she kept thinking about Zhang Yi's offer. Should she discuss it with her students? When her students saw the resources she had brought, they were overjoyed and immediately swarmed the food like zombies. Feeling slightly relieved, Lien wanted to know how their first day of survival had gone. She asked if they had managed to fish in the river. One of the students replied that they had suffered greatly when working at the Shounen base, but now they could finally enjoy fresh air and freedom. However, none of them wanted to work outside in the cold weather. In the end, they had only caught 3 fish. Lien wasn't surprised by this result. The young men were dissatisfied with such a small amount of food and wanted more. However, one of the wiser students reminded them that this food was something Lien had obtained from Zhang Yi. They needed to learn how to gather their own food with their own hands. One of the students then asked Lien if she could request Zhang Yi to let them all stay at his place as well. They insisted that they could eat less and help with household chores if necessary. Other students strongly argued that if Karen and Shur could stay there, why couldn't they? With a serious expression, Lien told them that they were not like those 2 girls. Karen and Sher possessed extraordinary intellectual abilities that none of them could match. Even after hearing this, her selfish students still pleaded with Lien to try harder to find a way for them to live in Zhang Yi's home. Hearing their words, Lien was now certain she couldn't discuss Zhang Yi's offer with them yet.